In one of my first game reviews, I proclaimed Grand Theft Auto 4 as the greatest game I've ever played. A year later, I wrote a review about Grand Theft Auto Vice City, where I lauded its location, soundtrack, and visual design, noting that it is the most aesthetically iconic game in the entire series. So where does Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, arguably the most popular game in the entire franchise, at least among those old enough to have been alive when it was released, fit in with these classic games? Hitting store shelves back in 2004, San Andreas was one of the most anticipated game releases of all time. 2001's Grand Theft Auto 3 revolutionised the sandbox genre, while 2002's GTA Vice City gave the series its character, charm, atmosphere, soundtrack, and general iconicism that it would go on to be renowned for. Needless to say, by the time the fall of 2004 rolled around, the hype around the next Grand Theft Auto was at an absolute fever pitch and, quite frankly, eclipsed anything else ever seen in the medium up until that point in terms of anticipation, renown, and general media coverage. For me, San Andreas is the series' magnum opus, the most ambitious game in the entire franchise. It expanded its sandbox to encompass an entire state, added RPG-esque customization options, and filled its sprawling map with an incredible amount of side missions, collectibles, and Easter eggs. It crafted a lengthy story which evolves and shifts as you pass through its various cities and locales, encountering a litany of diverse and eclectic characters, which sees you go from gangbanging on the streets of Los Santos to empire building on the Las Venturas Strip, to infiltrating secret alien bases, and every conceivable thing in between. The game puts you in the shoes of Carl C.J. Johnson, a reformed gangbanger who's returning home from Liberty City, a fictionalized New York City, to Los Santos, GTA's version of Los Angeles, to bury his mother who's just been murdered. Right upon arrival, Carl is abducted by the corrupt LSPD officer Tenpenny, along with cronies Officers Pulaski and Hernandez, and is immediately informed that they have framed him for the murder of another police officer, before dropping him off in a neighbourhood controlled by the Ballas gang, the biggest rivals of his former gang, the Grove Street families. Making his way home via stolen BMX, Carl reunites with Big Smoke, his friend and current Grove Street member, who takes Carl to his mother's funeral. There, he reunites with his sister Kendall and his brothers Sweet and friend Ryder, with the latter two being less than enthused to see him, viewing him as a traitor for leaving the neighbourhood. Suddenly, a group of ballas in a lowrider perform a drive-by at the funeral, forcing the crew to flee on their BMX bikes back to Grove Street. For a game that's known for its gigantic, diverse open world and its lengthy, evolving story, this is an oddly rushed beginning. Within the course of what is essentially the first mission, CJ returns home, is framed for a murder, attends his mother's funeral, and is immediately thrust back into the world of gang violence. I think the reason Rockstar did this is because they wanted to get all the preamble out of the way, so you could just begin playing through the missions and run wild in the game's chaotic sandbox as quickly as possible, which I can respect. However, pacing-wise, I feel like all this could have unfolded over half a dozen missions or so, rather than being crammed into the game's first 10 minutes. That being said, what remains is so lengthy, sundry, fast and well paced that you'll quickly forget about its hasty beginnings. This opening mission, along with many of the early missions, also emphasises the game's newer features, as well as the improvements on the established core mechanics. Within the first dozen missions or so, we spray paint over Ballas graffiti with spray cans, climb over obstacles, engage in a lowrider hydraulics competition, get a haircut, go to the gym, eat, complete a home invasion, and engage in a gang war with the Ballas to take control over one of their neighbourhoods. Basically, the message was clear. This wasn't just an evolution of the Grand Theft Auto formula. It was an expansion beyond the imaginations and expectations of those who eagerly anticipated its release. The RPG and customization elements were by far the biggest additions to the gameplay. Whereas in previous games, and in subsequent games for that matter, customization options for your protagonist were limited to some minor costume changes, San Andreas not only afforded you a much broader slew of ways to customize your character's clothing and hairstyles, but you could physically change CJ's appearance by going to the gym and getting ripped, or going to the pizza parlour and getting rotund, both of which affect attributes like your physical strength and stamina. Speaking of which, pretty much every core gameplay mechanic is tied into an RPG leveling up system. The aforementioned gym sessions not only make you physically stronger and muscular, it allows you to learn new fighting moves at gyms across the 3 cities, the coolest of which is a wicked 3-kick combination you can learn in a Kung Fu gym in San Fierro. Aside from Kung Fu fighting, your driving skills increase the more you drive, swimming for long durations increases your stamina, speed and lung capacity, and frequent use of any weapon makes you more lethal and efficient with it, as well as allowing you to do things like move and shoot simultaneously. Speaking of weapons, the biggest improvement mechanically in San Andreas over its predecessors, aside perhaps from the fact that you can actually swim this time, is the combat. Ironically, the actual gunplay in previous GTA games were among the weakest features. The animations were over the top, with ridiculous recoil and exaggerated muzzle flashes and tracer rounds, and the aiming was, frankly, bad, with manual aiming feeling clunky and difficult to control, and auto-aiming being inconsistent and hard to lock on, making gunfights, particularly with multiple adversaries, often tedious if not frustrating. While hardly Call of Duty, the aiming and shooting mechanics and animations in San Andreas are vastly superior to Vice City. Locking onto enemies is much smoother and consistent, while moving from one target to the other is far easier. Manually aiming a weapon is much more intuitive too. As I mentioned also, the more you use a weapon, the more skilled and efficient you become with it, which eventually allows you to do advantageous things like move while firing or firing while strafing. It's still not perfect, but is vastly improved over its predecessors. The other major combat addition are stealth takedowns, which allow you to quietly execute enemies with a knife, which is great when you're trying to complete missions incognito. You also have access to a silent pistol, which is handy in the same vein. Another feature which is unique to San Andreas is gang warfare. After you take control of your first Ballas neighbourhood, the map becomes coloured, indicating which neighbourhoods are controlled by Grove Street, the Ballas and the Vargos, a third rival gang. In order to take over a territory, you have to go into it and start attacking gangbangers walking the streets. Once you do this, a gang war will ensue, which consists of 3 waves of enemies who wield increasingly formidable firepower. If you outlast and defeat them, the hood is yours. To add an extra dimension to this gameplay feature, a conquered hood can come under attack at any time, and when they do, you have to go into that neighbourhood and defend it. Fail to do so, and the gang will take it over, meaning you have to fight to get it back. As a side mission, this is one of the most fun in the entire series. Like all side missions, it can become repetitive. However, if you space gang warfare between other missions and activities, conquering all of Los Santos is a satisfying venture. Speaking of gangs, let's talk about the setting and aesthetic of San Andreas. Taking its most valuable lesson from Vice City, San Andreas makes a point of deeply entrenching itself in a very specific moment in American time and culture. Where Vice City was set in the decadent mid-80s inspired Miami, taking inspiration from movies and shows like Scarface and Miami Vice and the glittery pop and glam rock of the era, San Andreas takes place in the early 1990s version of California, drawing from movies like Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society, and the gritty cynicism of hardcore gangster rap and nihilistic hard rock and grunge. The game takes place, at least initially, in Los Santos, with CJ, his family and his homies living in Ganton, a tribute to the real-life southern Los Angeles city of Compton. Plagued by a rapidly depleting control over their surrounding neighbourhoods and the rising crack cocaine epidemic, CJ struggles to integrate himself with Sweet, Ryder and the rest of the gang by attempting to get the drugs out of the hood and re-establish Grove Street as the dominant powerhouse on the streets. Also, quick note, this video will contain major spoilers, so if, for some bizarre reason, you haven't played San Andreas yet, do yourself a favour, stop watching this video and download it. After its rushed beginning, the game takes its time establishing its narrative and familiarising you with its supporting cast. Each member of the gang has their own errands they want CJ to run. Brother Sweet's missions typically revolve around rebuilding the Grove Street families and CJ gaining respect, while working for Ryder or Smoke usually involves stealing or hijacking weapons, drugs or money. Meanwhile, the LSPD and Officer Tenpenny, who blackmail CJ consistently throughout the story, usually have CJ commit acts of criminality that stir up tensions between different rival gangs. In typical GTA fashion, once we've become familiar with all these characters, the game settles into its groove, with the map being populated by different letter icons representing different jobs with different people that you can engage with, typically as you see fit. As I've said before on multiple occasions, pacing is one of the most important facets of any story-driven game. and San Andreas continued that tradition of the masterfully paced open world established by its two predecessors. However, it improved upon those titles in two major ways. The first is with mission variety. While GTA 3 and Vice City in particular had its own eclectic cast of characters who had different types of errands to run, San Andreas really pushed the series in terms of different mission types, utilising varied gameplay mechanics. In one mission, you're performing a Twilight home invasion with Ryder, stealing weapons from a military veteran. Using your newly acquired stealthy movement, you break into his home, taking boxes full of guns and loading them into the back of a truck before dawn, then driving them to a safe house. Upon completion, you can go across the street to Sweet's house, where you can go with him and some of the homies to perform a drive-by shooting at a Bala funeral. Afterwards, Sweet might ask you to keep an eye out on Kendall and her boyfriend Caesar, which leads to a lowrider competition, which instigates a rhythm-based minigame that you play to bounce your car in rhythm to the music. That same mechanic comes into play when OG Loke gets you to acquire a sound system for his house party, which sees you engaging in a dance competition with a lady to gain access to the van housing the system. Many of the missions also felt much grander and elaborate in scale, with Rockstar making massive strides in cinematic presentation. In another mission, OG Loke asks CJ to steal a rhyme book from Mad Dog, Los Santos' biggest rapper. This has you sneaking into his mansion in the Vinewood Hills, going from room to room, hiding in the shadows and taking out his security one by one, grabbing his rhyme book in his recording studio, and sneaking back out again, hopefully undetected. Another mission sees you helping Big Smoke in a shootout with the Russian Mafia. A massive, elaborate chase sequence ensues, with Big Smoke speeding through the streets on a motorbike, with you on the back letting fly with an Uzi, trying to outrun the Russians, who give chase in vehicles and also set up roadblocks along the way. Ending up in the giant Los Santos storm drain, the chase culminates in the boys being chased by a giant truck, in a not-so-subtle nod to Terminator 2, before it explodes, taking out all the Russians in a fiery inferno, which allows CJ and Big Smoke to escape. The second big improvement in terms of mission structure is just that, structure, or, more specifically, the way the missions, setting and narrative intertwine together as the story evolves, building towards its narrative peaks and valleys. While the state of San Andreas is the biggest star in the game, the cast of characters are no slouches either. Officer Tenpenny is arguably the series' best antagonist, accomplishing what every good villain does, managing to be iconic, charismatic, yet detestable all at the same time. Carl's brother Sweet is irritable and difficult, which can be a little grating, but given the circumstances and the fact that CJ is his younger brother, is obviously written to be that way. Caesar, although a gangbanger himself, plays the straight man, the voice of reason within all the chaos, while Ryder, the loose cannon with a small man complex, is so ridiculous and unreasonable that he unwittingly becomes one of the comic relief characters. As for CJ himself, he's fine. He's a perfectly serviceable, if not exceptional, video game protagonist, occasionally funny and with just enough good-naturedness amidst his violent actions and rough exterior to make him likeable. While not as iconic as Tommy Vercetti or as charming as Nico Bellic, nor as vibrant or interesting as either, he's never offensively boring or unenjoyable, and is, luckily, carried by a great supporting cast. The highlights of which, at least during the first third of the game, are Big Smoke and OG Loke. Big Smoke is a big, lovable but shady bastard, whose schemes always end up putting you in a compromising position. Most important of all though is the fact that he's hilarious, with his raspy voice and elaborate nonsensical ramblings and hypotheses delivered in a style akin to a gospel preacher, providing some of the funniest, most quotable lines in the entire series. OG Loke, just released from prison, who also grew up on Grove Street but was never tough enough to join the gang proper, is an aspiring rapper and wannabe gangster, whose actions, both on the streets and in the recording booth, fall short of both aspirations. He may be the one character more quotable than Big Smoke, but unlike your rotund fellow gangbanger, is not meant to be taken seriously one iota. Once these core characters are established, the game does an amazing job at bringing the first gang-banging and Los Santos-centric third of the game to its conclusion. Stealing guns for Ryder, stealing rhymes for Loke, helping Sweet take out drug dealers and rebuild Grove Street's reputation, all while doing the LSPD's dirty work, culminating in a satisfying, perfectly paced crescendo where the boys have a house party on Grove Street, with OG Loke performing his stolen rhymes on his borrowed sound system. Of course, the Ballas attack in force, but are repelled by CJ, Sweet, and the newly invigorated Grove Street families. But naturally, it all falls apart. CJ, led by Caesar, sees Ryder and Big Smoke, flanked by the LSPD, moving the Green Sabre, the car used in the drive-by shooting that killed CJ's mother, revealing the obligatory betrayal angle that permeates every GTA game. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Sweet is surrounded by ballas, taking heavy fire. When we get to him, he's been critically wounded, and mid-shootout, you're surrounded by the LSPD and forced to surrender, bringing this section of the game, and the hopes of a reunited Grove Street, to an abrupt end. And then, suddenly, we're thrust into Angel Pines, a backwater rural area of the state. You're forced to do more dirty work for Tenpenny, as failure to comply or going after Big Smoke would result in Sweet's demise, who fortunately survived the shootout but is locked up in prison. This is a jarring moment, a complete departure from everything we have become accustomed to aesthetically and narratively up until this point, transplanting us into a new environment with completely different mission types, environments, characters, and general feel. Your first job while in exile is killing an LSPD snitch for Tenpenny and photographing his body. The only problem is that he's located high in the mountains under armed guard. To access him, you have to grab a camera, ride a dirt bike all the way up said mountain, take out his security and assassinate him. This leads to a wild car chase on the mountainous terrain, either ending in a fiery wreck or an on-foot chase leading you to gunning down your target. This mission establishes two things: emphasize the breadth and size of San Andreas, and the switch in tonality. Firstly, let's start with the game's breadth and scope. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is a massive game. For context, the previous two entries in the franchise all had maps that were comparable in size to Los Santos, never mind its 3 cities and the surrounding rurality. In fact, GTA 4, while containing a much bigger city, didn't have the surrounding countryside, mountains, desert, forests, and small towns that San Andreas did. And even GTA 5, the latest entry in the series, which has a much larger map than San Andreas in terms of pure area, doesn't contain nearly the same depth and variety, and only has one major urban centre, that being Los Santos. Therefore, San Andreas is still, to this day, and in the most tangible sense, the biggest game in the entire series, both geographically and in terms of content. Once again, this adds to the sense of scope and adventure that this entry has become famous for. At the time, it was so groundbreaking to have a mainstream sandbox game like San Andreas containing such a large and explorative map. If you add the leveling up system and all the aforementioned customization options to this, San Andreas, in many ways, had many fundamental elements of an open world RPG, but without any of the grinding associated with them, giving it a depth for the hardcore gamer while keeping it accessible and cool for the masses. The only drawback with this is that travelling between certain locations and completing certain missions can be a bit tedious. For example, one mission later in the game has you travelling from San Fierro all the way back to Angel Pines to meet up with Caesar to photograph associates of Sweet and Ryder. For whatever reason, the first time I played the game I had difficulty identifying exactly who to photograph and at what time, and had to repeat the mission multiple times. The problem is that there's no way to immediately restart the mission, meaning you have to drive all the way back into the city to re-enter the mission marker just to drive all the way back out to Angel Pines. Again, the size of San Andreas is one of the game's biggest qualities, and perhaps the one it is most well known and renowned for, but it can be a drag sometimes when you have to replay missions like this. Now, let's talk about tonality. General consensus dictates that GTA Vice City has the best atmosphere in the series, while I, perhaps rather controversially, maintain that Grand Theft Auto 4 has. However, we often forget how brilliantly atmospheric San Andreas is, and how well it replicates its 90s gangsta source material in its own twisted image. As I mentioned previously, the game takes place in the California-inspired state of San Andreas, comprising 3 cities and the surrounding rurality. The game can roughly be divided into 3 sections, with the first taking place exclusively in the city of Los Santos, the second in the San Francisco-inspired city of San Fierro and the surrounding countryside, and the third in Las Venturas, San Andreas' answer to Las Vegas, and the surrounding desert. As previously mentioned, the first third of the game does a great job of establishing the tone and setting of early 90s gangland Los Angeles. In typical GTA fashion, it combines the rather adult, reality-based themes of violence, drugs, and gang warfare with its own sense of quirky and sophomoric humour. The GTA series has rarely taken itself seriously, and San Andreas is arguably the most outrageously over-the-top game in the series. While it tackles the culture of urban black gangland in America, playing upon these stereotypes, it does so with its tongue firmly in cheek, filtering it through its signature absurdist, nihilistic lens. As I said in previous reviews of Rockstar games, humour based on stereotypes absolutely has its place in the medium, and Rockstar were the masters of this style of comedy. Another vital element in establishing the atmosphere, and one of the components that the entire series is renowned for, is the soundtrack. Now, arguing which game in the series has the best soundtrack is like debating which slice of cake is most enjoyable, because frankly they're all outstanding. And San Andreas is no different. While cruising down the streets of Los Santos doing work for the Grove, you're most likely going to be glued to Radio Los Santos, which plays contemporary rap music, or at least what was contemporary rap music back in 1992. And it's a who's who of the best tracks from the most prominent West Coast rappers of that era. Nothing But a G Thing by Dr. Dre, Always Into Something by NWA, It Was a Good Day by Ice Cube, Hood Took Me Under by Compton's Most Wanted, and Just Don't Give a Fuck by Tupac Shakur are just a few of the tracks you'll be blaring while behind the wheel of your lowrider. When you're transplanted to Angel Pines, all of these atmospheric elements are skewed to fit CJ's ever-evolving story and environment. Whereas up until now you were used to completing missions like drive-bys and home invasions for your homies in urban Los Santos, now you're introduced to characters like The Truth, an aging hippie conspiracy theorist who has you do things like steal a combine harvester for his sprawling cannabis farm. The best of these missions are the ones performed with Catalina, Caesar's psychotic cousin. This is a 4-part mission, which has you committing robberies in the small towns strewn across the rural landscape. Not only are these multi-part missions a precursor to the multiple choice scenarios of Grand Theft Auto 4 and the heist preparation jobs in GTA 5, they help re-establish the vastness and freedom of San Andreas. The game also continues its consistently hilarious writing. Whereas urban black American culture was the initial victim of Rockstar's offensive satire, the focus shifts to crazy Latinas and inbred rednecks real quick. It lacks the sophistication of GTA 4 and later Rockstar games, but the ostentatious caricatures fit the feel and aesthetic of San Andreas. Rockstar are, or at least were back then, equal opportunity shit talkers, and would ridicule all equally and with equal scorn, with the results being equally ridiculous and hilarious. Catalina is another great example of this, with her fiery Latina personality and bipolar love and hatred for CJ producing some of the most ludicrous and funniest moments in the game. Speaking of the slapstick and ridiculous, I want to take a brief detour and focus for a moment on the game's graphics. It's been said before many times about this generation of Grand Theft Auto games, but since this is an honest review, it has to be mentioned again. They're bad. Even for the time, San Andreas had pretty terrible graphics. The character models are particularly bad. Fingers are constantly glued together like cardboard, bodies waddle around in bizarre proportions, and faces look plastic, jagged, and barely distinguishable as human. Speaking of jaggedness, the game has a particular issue with environmental corners and edges. This is especially noticeable when driving, as roads and sidewalks turn at sharp octagon-like points, which stick out like eyesores and are impossible to ignore. Certain graphical elements, like character reflections, are surprisingly and incomprehensibly sophisticated by comparison, contrasting starkly with more important graphical features like said character models. All that being said, it is a testament to the game's resounding strengths, its atmosphere, voice work, music and narrative, that it really doesn't taint or interfere with the experience as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, the tone and aesthetic of the game shifts as the story and locales progress and change. We already touched on how the missions and characters reflect this, but it also extends to the soundtrack. Maybe I'm alone in this, but the first time I played San Andreas, I found myself organically listening to different radio stations depending on where I was driving in the game. Naturally, you can listen to any of the radio stations at any time, but some of them are better suited to different areas in the game. While it feels kind of strange to listen to country music station K-Rose while cruising the barrios of Los Santos, blaring I Love a Rainy Night by Eddie Rabbitt while ascending the mountains to begin a mission for Catalina, or driving to an ammunition store with All My Exes Live in Texas playing in the background feels wildly appropriate. Another excellent radio station to listen to is K-Dust, which plays classic rock and is hosted by Tommy the Nightmare Smith, who is, bizarrely, voiced by Axl Rose. Remember, this is back in 2004, when Axl was the laughingstock of the rock world and right in the middle of some kind of existential breakdown. Containing timeless classics like Barracuda, Strutter and White Wedding, This station can feasibly be listened to at any point in the game and both be highly enjoyable and appropriate. However, listening to Freebird while speeding through the epic landscape of the countryside, Hold the Line while slowly driving down the streets of San Fierro with the Truth and his hippie friends, or hearing A Horse with No Name come on while exploring the deserts around Las Venturas, give the game a unique sense of diversity and evolution. Before I move on, I also want to mention Radio X, the grunge and alternative rock station. Comparable to Radio Los Santos, it plays some of the absolute best songs within the purview of those genres, and is arguably the game's best overall station. Heavy hitters such as Cult of Personality, Killing in the Name of, Rusty Cage, Plush, and Mother by Danzig are among the best songs here. And while all the tracks can, again, conceivably be enjoyed anywhere, try listening to Welcome to the Jungle in Los Santos, Them Bones in San Fierro, Hellraiser while bombing down the open road, and Fool's Gold in Las Venturas and the surrounding desert. Let me finish this segue, before I become totally redundant, by reiterating that the soundtrack for San Andreas is just a little bit good. After helping the Truth burn a field of cannabis to avoid incarceration, you make your way to San Fierro in a hippie wagon, hopefully while listening to Freebird, to collect on a deed you won in an illegal street race to a car garage. This not only continues moving the story forward, but feels like an entirely new chapter in the life of CJ and his closest companions, which is, again, a credit to the game's sense of pacing. San Andreas does what every lengthy, story-driven campaign does. It introduces new mechanics, locations, characters, and ideas, all while maintaining its cohesion and identity. And this is such an important facet of San Andreas. Sure, working to get your brother out of jail, being at the mercy of Tenpenny, and hunting your old friends turned treacherous enemies Smoke and Ryder are strands of commonality that linger throughout the game's entire duration. But aside from that, San Fierro, its characters, and the way they all intertwine with CJ and his journey are often divorced from these story elements. The game does a great job of allowing these new locations and individuals to exist autonomically, but also ties them back to the overarching plot of the game when necessary. For example, take two of the most prominent characters introduced to CJ while in San Fierro: Jizzy, an obnoxious but hilarious pimp, and Mike Torino, an undercover government agent. Both Jizzy and Torino are connected to CJ and his roots in Los Santos in different ways. Jizzy is working with Ryder, smuggling drugs in and out of San Fierro, and Torino, who works for the government, uses his ability to have Sweet potentially released from prison as leverage to get CJ to do his bidding. These characters not only help maintain the connective tissue between CJ and his main story arc, they help progress the game autonomously by introducing new mission types and mechanics. The most unique and grandiose are Torino's missions. Taking place, for the most part, at an airbase in the desert, one of his first tasks is literally having you completing flight school so you can fly airplanes in certain missions, a first in the series and a mechanic which wouldn't return for a whole decade until Grand Theft Auto 5. One such mission sees you board a departing cargo plane on a dirt bike, taking out rival government agents inside, before planting a bomb on board and skydiving to safety. But perhaps the most infamous mission in the entire game sees you breaking into Area 69, a typically juvenile Rockstar bastardization of Area 51, to steal a black project. Encountering multiple government agents, CJ has to take them out using stealth, firepower, and his night vision goggles, going deeper and deeper underground until he finds what he's looking for. The black project turns out to be a jetpack, which he subsequently straps on, ascending out of the government bunker to safety. In a second mission, you must use the jetpack to board a moving train to steal a vial of green alien goo for the Truth. Now, San Andreas is easily the most over-the-top and fantastical game in the entire series. And while I'm not usually a fan of this kind of cartoonish science fiction bollocks, in the eccentric, ridiculous smorgasbord that is San Andreas, not only is it acceptable, it reinforces the fact that this game strives on the absurd, lives for the epic set piece, and prides itself on being a narrative and mechanical variety show. The other character introduced at this time is Woozy, a triad leader who forms a genuine friendship with CJ when you put in work for him against the Vietnamese gangs of San Fierro. One of the missions you perform for Woozy has you swimming out at sea to stealthily plant a bug on a Vietnamese cargo ship. However, if you do not have high enough lung capacity, you have to practice swimming in the ocean during free play until you can hold your breath underwater sufficiently to begin the mission, and thus progress the story. Missions like this emphasize one of its newest gameplay mechanics, while reinforcing the importance of building up your stats and attributes. Aside from increasing his lung capacity, Woozy also recruits CJ to help him run a casino in Las Venturas. So, manning a dirt bike from our airbase and whizzing past the iconic Welcome to Las Venturas sign, while a horse with no name provides the soundtrack, we find ourselves cruising into the game's third and final act. If the second act is all about building up to a bombastic crescendo, then the third act is about building an empire. Centered initially around a heist, CJ and Woozy put together a plan to rob the rival Caligula casino. It's a multifaceted operation that takes planning, which leads to submissions and submissions within submissions, and, quite frankly, is more elaborate and satisfying to execute than any of the heists in GTA 5. In order to successfully infiltrate the casino, CJ must obtain the blueprints for Caligula, steal dynamite from a desert mine, acquire 4 police motorbikes, and get access to the casino's power by skydiving onto the San Andreas Dam. Additionally, CJ has to seduce the casino's croupier. This involves him taking out a gimp, stealing his suit, purchasing a dildo, and engaging in a sadomasochistic relationship with her, building up her love and trust so we can convince her to comply and give her the casino's keycard. The last submission is the most time-consuming of all, and perfectly encapsulates both San Andreas' lofty ambition and its outrageous, sophomore humour. While pulling off the heist itself after all the prep work once again highlights the game's sense of epic scope. After you've conquered the betting world in Las Venturas, it's time for the game's story to come full circle, meaning we're heading back to Los Santos to reunite the family and settle some old, long overdue scores. Torino, keeping to his word, has Sweet released from prison, but when you pick him up from the train station, he's not so much overjoyed as he is enraged. Again, he's a bit of a miserable bastard. Aside from now owning a successful casino in Las Venturas and a garage in San Fierro, CJ has started managing rapper Mad Dog, acquiring his Vinewood Hills mansion in the process. Rather than being grateful for his freedom and proud of CJ for achieving the American dream, Sweet laments the increasing deterioration of the hood, and insists that they must return to clean it up, take out Big Smoke and the drug pushers, and finally get even with Tenpenny. The final stages of the game see Los Santos descend into anarchy after members of the LSPD are acquitted for police brutality. Between this revelation and the final mission of the game, the streets of Los Santos literally descend into a chaotic mess of arson, gunfire, and general lawlessness in real time, even during free play. It's a cool feature, as it adds a new dynamic to the pedestrian area of the map, and gives the game a, if only brief, sense of external anarchy which, for once, is out of the player's control. However, there is a caveat to this. The LSPD acquittals and subsequent riots are based on the real-life LA riots that took place in 1992. This is not a political channel, and I'm not going to get into the minutiae of the incident, but needless to say, dozens of people were killed, and thousands of homes and businesses were completely destroyed during the ensuing riots. Now, back when I played this game, the year 1992 felt like an eternity ago. However, with the benefit of aging, I can now see that the 12 years that passed between this devastating incident and the release of San Andreas is no time at all. Upon replaying the game, I found the recreation of these riots quite jarring and, I must admit, a little distasteful. It's a minor criticism that I'm not sure many people have highlighted before, but I just feel like they could have excluded it entirely and it wouldn't have affected the game one iota. There's also an argument that making a game based on real life violence is, in and of itself, in poor taste, and that may be true. However, for me, recreating such a specific real life incident in a video game just doesn't sit well with me. The final showdown with Big Smoke and Officer Tenpenny is a particularly elaborate affair, and having already dispatched of secondary players Officer Pulaski and Ryder, are the only two loose ends to tie up. Big Smoke is bunkered down in a compound surrounded by the Ballas, Vargos and Russian Mafia. Fighting your way through literal floors of enemies, you finally confront Smoke, who is, ironically, sitting calmly playing a video game, anticipating your arrival. He explains that his desire for power and infamy at any cost led him to betray his Grove Street brothers, working with the LSPD to consolidate power on the streets. Armed with a shotgun, bulletproof vest and further backup, a game of cat and mouse ensues, eventually leading you to snuff out your former street brother. Tenpenny arrives, holds CG up at gunpoint, steals the now deceased Smoke's cash, and makes a run for it on foot, but not before shooting a generator which engulfs the entire compound in flames, requiring CJ to fight his way back out again, facing both the flames and yet another wave of enemy gangbangers. Tenpenny attempts to flee in a fire truck, leading to the last chase sequence. When he crashes his truck over the bridge which passes over the Grove Street neighbourhood, CJ and Sweet let him die of his injuries, leading him to suffer while not implicating themselves in his murder. No final mission of any game the breadth, scope and brilliance of San Andreas could ever fully live up to the hours and hours of quality that preceded it. That being said, it serves as a satisfying conclusion and closes the curtain on one of the most epic and iconic stories ever told in gaming. So, in summary, what can I say about San Andreas that I haven't attempted to say already, or that hasn't been said a million times before? I must be honest, I found this review difficult to structure, let alone write. There are so many different components to San Andreas, some moving harmoniously and others moving independently of each other, that it's nigh on impossible to mention them all, never mind cover them in detail. From the litany of different gameplay mechanics, to the customization options and leveling up systems, to the 3 major cities and surrounding small towns and morality, to the planes, trains and automobiles that litter these environments, to the cast of lovable, hateable, outrageous and hilarious characters, to the music, guns, gang warfare and hookers, the fact that I struggle to fit it all in is, in fact, a testament to everything that's wonderful about San Andreas. Some games, like its cousin Grand Theft Auto 4, excel because they are a cohesive experience, with everything operating in unison to create a seamless journey. San Andreas is not that game. San Andreas is a smorgasbord of different ideas, pathways and mechanics, each more ambitious and over the top than the last, creating a messy, chaotic, yet beautiful tapestry. An epic story with a litany of diversions and distractions, which, miraculously, all manage to bottleneck at the end to conclude what is, undoubtedly, one of the best sandbox games ever made, and the series' magnum opus.